Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive explainer. If you're a focused learner looking to master the sometimes crazy world of global supply chains, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're unpacking the ultimate roadmap for sourcing high-quality bakeware from China, specifically looking ahead to 2026. Whether you're a brand owner launching a private label or a bulk buyer for a major retailer, you know the demand for quality bakeware is just exploding. But how do you actually navigate this without falling into those super costly traps? You know, the ones that leave you with containers full of warping, totally unsellable pans? Well, let's figure that out.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our game plan for today. First, we're mapping China's regional clusters. Then, we'll talk about finding your perfect factory match, surviving the dreaded quality trap, walking through a rock-solid step-by-step sourcing workflow, and finally, we'll peek into the future at the 2026 hybrid bakeware trend. Let's get to it.
So, I want to kick things off by challenging a pretty common assumption. When someone asks, hey, where does your bakeware actually come from? A lot of folks just shrug and say, China. They kind of treat it like it's just one giant factory. But actually, scratch that. It's not even close. The reality is that sourcing from China means navigating this incredibly complex, living ecosystem of highly specialized regional clusters. If you don't know the geography right off the bat, you're honestly already at a massive disadvantage.
All right, moving to part one, mapping China's clusters, the geography of bakeware. Production over there is essentially concentrated in three distinct powerhouse hubs. First up, we've got Zhejiang province, specifically Ningbo and Yongkang. This is the absolute heartland for metal bakeware. Think your heavy-duty carbon steel roasting pans and aluminum muffin tins. Then, if you move down to Guangdong province to a city called Yangzheng, well, that's known as the hardware capital. That's exactly where you'd go for stainless steel baking tools, whisks, spatulas, you name it. And finally, also down in Guangdong, we have Shenzhen and Dongguan. These places are the undisputed centers for precision silicone and plastics. The big takeaway here? Specialization. It's totally crucial. You wouldn't go to Yangzheng to source a flexible silicone mat, and you definitely wouldn't head to Dongguan for heavy carbon steel. Which brings us to part two, finding your perfect match, diving into factory profiles.
Now, what's really fascinating here is how your specific buyer profile completely dictates your reality on the ground. Say you're an e-commerce seller, focused on speed, catching the latest trends. Your recommended region is Dongguan, simply because you need lower minimum order quantities and maybe even in-house photography. But flip that, consider a commercial buyer who's outfitting massive bakeries or hotels. Your number one priority is extreme durability. So your perfect match, that's Foshan, a region totally dedicated to industrial-grade bakeware, where you absolutely must make sure the material gauge means professional, heavy-duty standards.
3,000. Just let that massive number sink in for a second. If you're looking to source custom-colored or non-stick metal pans from Ningbo, 3,000 units is your typical minimum order quantity, or MOQ. And you might be wondering, why on earth is it so high? Well, it all comes down to the machinery. The automated coating systems they use for these metal pans, they require a huge minimum production run just to be cost-effective for the factory to even turn them on.
But hey, contrast that with this number, 500. If you're an Amazon seller sourcing silicone bakeware down in Dongguan, you can often negotiate MOQs of just 500 to 1,000 units for standard colors. It is a completely different ballgame. And it perfectly highlights why knowing your material and knowing your region is just absolutely critical before you even think about sending out those quote requests.
Okay, let's get into part three, surviving the quality trap and uncovering the hidden dangers.
So there's this really dangerous myth out there that cheaper is always better. Let me tell you, in the bakeware world, cheap is a giant glaring red flag. Actually, the most expensive part of a metal pan is the non-stick coating. The trap here is that sketchy factories will sometimes use this low-grade PTFE that literally flakes right off onto your customer's chocolate chip cookies. Yuck, right? Nobody wants that. To survive this trap, you've got to demand specific, trusted coating brands like Whitford or Chemours. And always request a cross-cut tape test report to officially verify that the coating is actually sticking to the metal.
And here's another shocker for you. 0.4 millimeters. That is the thickness of a cheap carbon steel pan. Do you know what happens to a 0.4 millimeter pan when you crank your oven up to 400 degrees? It warps. It literally pops right out of shape with this loud bang. In the baking world, weight equals quality. So to ensure you're getting a premium product that won't warp and enrage your customers, you must explicitly specify a gauge of 0.6 to 0.8 millimeters for home use and push it over 1.0 millimeter for commercial use. No exceptions.
Now, this demand for physical quality brings us straight into the realm of legal compliance. Bakeware is legally classified as a food contact material. You really can't just wing this part. If you're selling in Europe, you've got to pass the LFGB standard, which is notoriously strict. Over in the US, it's the FDA standard 21 CFR 177.1550. And here is a huge pro tip straight from our source material. Never just ask a factory, hey, do you have a certificate? No, ask them for a lab report dated within the last 12 months specifically for the material they are using for your exact order. Shifting gears a bit, silicone is obviously a massive growth category right now, especially for private label brands. But that brings up a super crucial question. How do you spot fake silicone? Seriously, how do you know you aren't just being sold cheap, industrial-grade materials masquerading as food safe?
Well, here's the ultimate insider secret: the pinch test. It is just brilliant in its simplicity. When you get a sample in your hands, just give it a good twist or a pinch. If you see white streaks appearing in the color where you bent it, you've got a problem. That white color means the silicone is packed full of cheap fillers and is absolutely not pure food grade. You should always demand platinum-cured, filler-free silicone and then verify it yourself with that pinch test.
All right, part 4. Let's look at the step-by-step sourcing workflow, the playbook.
This right here brilliantly illustrates a foolproof, totally repeatable workflow to guarantee quality from the factory floor all the way to your final shipment. It all starts with a hyper-detailed request for quotation, the RFQ phase, where you define your exact gauge and coding. Then we move into step 2, sample evaluation. And look, you don't just look at the sample on your desk. You put it in a real oven. You measure the heat distribution, you test for warping during rapid temperature changes. After that, you need onboarding and an audit like BSCI or SEDEX, just to ensure social compliance, which is then followed by strict production monitoring.
And that perfectly brings us to step 5, final inspection, anchored by this critical quote from our source material. Use a third-party inspector to perform a leach test and check for scratches, which are common in bulk packed bakeware. Please, do not just rely on the factory's word. Before that shipping container is ever loaded up and sealed, use an established third-party inspector, someone like Kima or VTrust, to physically get in there and examine the goods. Finally, part 5. Let's talk about the 2026 hybrid bakeware trend and look ahead.
So the most crucial point here is that consumer demand is constantly evolving. Think about it. Consumers really want the non-stick flexibility of silicone, but they are totally tired of their muffin trays just flopping over when they try to carry them to the oven. So by 2026, the market is aggressively shifting toward hybrid bakeware. We're talking about really clever assemblies that combine materials, like a rigid carbon steel frame that houses a flexible silicone insert or a ceramic-coated aluminum. But to pull this off smoothly, you can't use 2 different factories. You need to seek out what we call full solution factories that handle both metal and silicone under one roof. This guarantees that the parts actually fit together perfectly and eliminates a ton of logistics friction.
And running right alongside that hybrid trend is this massive, undeniable push for sustainability. We're seeing a huge eco-friendly focus. Things like PFAS and PFOA-free ceramic coatings and recycled aluminum cores. Guys, these aren't just nice-to-haves anymore. In the EU and North American markets heading into 2026, these non-toxic, eco-friendly materials are practically non-negotiable if you want to see real sustained growth.
So, wrapping all this up, it really leaves us with one final provocative question to ask yourself. Are you just chasing the absolute lowest price today, or are you actually building a resilient 2026 ready supply chain? As we've seen throughout this explainer, cheaping out on gauge thickness or skipping those vital lab tests is going to cost you so much more in the long run. By understanding China's regional clusters, demanding the exact right specs, and getting ahead of the hybrid trend, you're not just sourcing a product, you are fundamentally securing your brand's future. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to take this roadmap and apply it directly to your very next procurement cycle.